Hello again, and thanks for joining. So today we've got an epic battle. It's the battle of the vintage German wagons. Our competitors today are an old Piko wagon on the left and an old Marklin wagon on the right. I'm not totally sure when these two models came out, but I think it's sometime in the 70s, so I think they're very comparable. And we're going to check them out and see which one's the better of the two. So starting off looking at the Marklin box here, both of these models obviously second hand, and this one here has some shelf wear over the years and a couple of rips and bashes here and there. I quite like these Marklin boxes. They're quite clear, eye-catching, and they've got these really quite stylish diagrams of the wagon inside, and it's very clear on the end here what the number of this model is, and it has an actual photograph of the model there as well in the blue. The Piko box is much bigger by comparison than the Marklin one, and it comes with a tray inside this sleeve. Again, another second-hand model. This one here has a sticker here from Blue Peter in Plymouth, which I'm guessing was a model shop back in the day, and this indicates that maybe this cost £1.60 when it was first bought. On the Piko models you would have a sticker here showing you what the model was inside this box. This one's come off so you wouldn't know what was in here. Anyway, I'm going to get this one open and we'll take a look. What we have here from Piko is a Deutsche Reichsbahn brown box van with a peaked roof. It's quite an interesting model and it's got some nice details on it. Let's have a closer look at this end of the wagon. And what's evident here is that there is a lot of detail. There are lots of rivets, planking and little hatches that have all been moulded into the main piece of plastic there. It all looks really quite good, very fine as well. The buffer beam even has some rivet detail on it. The buffers are just integral into the plastic of the chassis. As we start to look down the side of this wagon, again it has a lot of detail here. I really like all these hatches here, and there's even nice detail here of the runners for the door as well, which has also a nice catch and rivet detail and planking around it. So a lot on offer for such a small, simple wagon. The printing isn't too bad here, but it isn't that great. It's a bit blurry on the smaller numbers here. Now that could have worn off with age, but we'll compare that to the Marklin one in a minute. Along the chassis there is also additional rivet detail as well, and we've got a fair representation of the springs and the axle boxes here. They actually look really good, and even the brake gear is in line with these wheels as well. There's a step in the middle that's been moulded into the chassis plastic, and underneath we've got some really good representation of wood on the planking and all the bracing there with rivets and brake gear. It really looks very good underneath here. This model is held together with two screws. One seems to be missing here underneath this axle, but you can see the other one underneath this one here. Bit of dirt on these wheels, but they do revolve really well. Couplings are metal and they do cantilever a little bit. And the roof is just part of the main moulding, but it has been painted this dark grey colour, and you can see the ribs going across the top of the roof, so that's really quite good. And also the painting isn't too bad here on the edges. You can still see some of the brown underneath here, but it's not too bad at all. So Piko have come out fighting with this model. It looks really cool. It's such a simple wagon, and yet they've really gone to town, especially around this area with all the hatches and details here. So let's get the Marklin one out and we'll check that out as well. So the Marklin one is certainly a different kettle of fish to the Piko one. It has more metal on this model and it does seem to be a little bit of a cruder design, possibly older than the Piko one. We have a brakeman's cab on this particular one, which has got some nice rivet detail and brackets around it, but no glazing. This part here that sticks out also has rivet detail around it. It's quite nice. And we have these handrails here, which are made out of metal wire. They go through the little steps down here on the bottom, but they are at a funny angle. I'm not sure whether that's prototypical or not. It certainly doesn't look like that on the box. The buffer beam doesn't have any detail at all. These buffers are integral into the main chassis of this wagon, which is actually made of metal. Looking down the side of this wagon, you see things like this handrail here doesn't have any space underneath it, but it does have a lot of nice detail. The planking here, the vertical ribs with the rivets, and these little hatches here are all very nicely moulded in here. On this one, these parts here where you can see these numbers and letters, these are actually moulded into the main piece of plastic, and they're just picked out in white here. That's quite interesting. You can see as well this one is SBB CFF. So this is a Swiss wagon. Then we come to this point here where we've got this metal door added in. It's got some rivet detail on it in this handle, which is just part of the main piece of metal, but it's been picked out in silver there. And this slides along the track. It's quite stiff though, and that track is very visible here with these holes. But this is a feature that the Piko wagon doesn't have. Further down the wagon we have one of these hatches open, which is a nice alternative way of moulding this. And then we've got these parts here where they have some printing on it, but it's really actually quite sloppy on the corners there, not as good as the Piko one. No details down here on the chassis, and we have a step here as well. This is a bit more crude than the Piko one. It's not quite so fine, but it is made of metal. And then the definition of the springs and the axle boxes here is a bit less defined than the Piko one because they are metal. But we do have brake gear here, which is close to the wheel treads, At this end of the wagon it's a bit plainer, but we do have some really nice rivet detail and brackets, and we have some numbers there moulded into the main piece of plastic. The roof on this wagon has this really pleasing arch to it, and it's been painted silver and it's got some really nice ribs on it as well. No moulding mark either, which is really good. But we do see some issues with the paint on the edges. You can see that it is just integral into the main piece of plastic, and the underside is brown there, and the edge here has some of the paint worn away, which might actually be from age, but nevertheless it is still present on this model. And it's much more evident on this end of the model, where you can see the difference here between the silver of the roof, which has got some fuzziness to it, and the brown underneath. And looking underneath this wagon, absolutely no detail at all on the chassis under here. Wheels are very free rolling, and they've got these holes in them as well, which the Piko ones do not. The couplings cantilever on this really retro looking spring arrangement here, and they do have a fair amount of movement as well. So the Marklin one has come out fighting as well. I think it's going to be the heavier of the two though, so let's put them both on the scales and see how much they weigh. So the Marklin wagon weighs 75 grams. And the Piko wagon is lighter at 62 grams. So our two contenders today have put up a good fight between each of them, and both these wagons have some things that are really good and some things which are a bit lacking. Let's start off with the Piko one. The things I like about this is that the moulding has got a lot of detail on it, especially around the hatches, and the painting on the roof is really good. I also like that the brake gear is more in line with the wheels, and it's got some really nice detail underneath this wagon as well. But this wagon is let down by the printing on it. It's really quite sloppy, and it may have just been worn off over age, but it is looking pretty ropey today. And in the other corner we've got the Marklin model. It's a bit cruder, more of a bruiser of a wagon I guess, and it looks a little bit overscaled by comparison to the Piko one. The definition on the plastic moulding on the Marklin one is a bit less defined than the Piko one. The Piko one seems more refined. And the door on the Marklin has got some really terrible tracks on it, and the handrails on the end just look a bit weird as well. And one final thing going against the Marklin one is the paint finish on the silver on the roof. It's just fuzzy around the edges and doesn't look that good. When it comes to the boxes, I actually think Marklin win on this one. I like the style of these drawings on the front of the box. The Piko one seems more generic, it isn't specifically for this wagon. However, the tray does keep the model more secure and safe from bashes, whereas the Marklin one relies on the model inside being tough. So who do you think came out on top here? For me, I'm actually going to plumb for the Marklin one because I actually prefer more vintage looking models, and I think this is a classic look for an older model railway wagon, and I think it's really robust. It'll last for a long time. However, that said, the Piko one I think has got details on it which would stack up by even today's standards. So if you had to compare between these two, you may go for the Piko one or you may go for the Marklin one. Why don't you let me know in the comments below what you think? My winner today, going against all the odds, is actually the Marklin one. But that's just what I think. What do you think? Which would be your winner? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. And if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps this channel grow. I'll put both of these on the turntable so you can see all the way around. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching. See ya.